I'm going to give a shir tonight on what's called the pnimius of Lashon Harah. Now, until now, we know that fundamentally, Lashon Harah, we know that if a person speaks Lashon Harah, then there's what's called midah keneged midah. In other words, if you speak Lashon Harah about somebody else, then the Satan can prosecute you, midah keneged midah. If you badmouth somebody else, then he immediately has permission min hashamayim, and that's basically the way he operates. He can badmouth you, he can degrade you, he can mekatreg, which means prosecution. Now, of course, once he's mekatreg you, that's what's called ma'iridin. It invokes the judgment, and you are judged. If you are found guilty, then of course a person is probably punished, unless a person has certain merits whereby the judgment itself is suspended. But if a person doesn't have merits, then he is appropriately punished. In addition, what happens, which I had mentioned elsewhere, is that when the Satan is able to pronounce, or rather when a person is pronounced guilty, that's the psak din, the verdict, then the Satan is able to be unique, to nourish from the kedusha of that person. And therefore he thrives, he grows in tremendous might, tigbur sarah. Depending on what the Jew has, the kedusha that he has, the Satan can be unique from that kedusha. And depending on the kedusha of Klal Yisrael, of Jews in general, the Satan can be unique from that kedusha. We had seen what it looks like. If the Jews have the Shekhinah, and the Jews speak Lashon Harah, and the Jews are found guilty in the sense the punishment is that they have to lose the Shekhinah, then the Satan can be unique from the Shekhinah itself. And the result is that he can found new ideologies, new religions. Give it to the Ummah Olam so that they can use to try to get Jews to leave their religion. I had once mentioned also that if the Satan is unique from the Or Mashiach, which begins to come down quite a while ago, in the year 1240, if he's unique from that Kedusha, which he is, then he's able to found new ideas or the entire scientific revolution. But all these ideas really were basically mentioned on the previous Lashon Harah tapes, which are 4 in number. What I want to go into today is the pnimius of Lashon Harah. Why is it we find that Lashon Harah is fundamental to the Geula? We find that, for instance, by Yetzias Mitzrayim, that the reason why the Jews got out of Egypt is because they did not speak Lashon Harah. As the Medrash says, that Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt, Elo Bishvil, Shalohoy Behem Misafi Lashon Harah. They didn't speak Lashon Harah. The question is, was Lashon Harah merely a schus which the Jews had to get out of the Geula, or was there something inherent in the Geula process itself which demands Shmiras Halashon, not speaking Lashon Harah? That's the question. And the answer really is that there is. Shmiras Halashon is inherent to the Geula. It's necessary for Geula to take place. And the question is why? What is the pnimius of Lashon Harah that makes it so devastating, as we will see, and makes it so necessary for the Geula process itself? Now, in order to understand the pnimius of Lashon Harah on a different level, more than what we had discussed before, about the fact that if a person speaks Lashon Harah, it creates kitrug and din and yanika and so on, tigbur sarah, in all kinds of ways. It's more than that. There is a dimension of Lashon Harah which is very important to understand. But since it's pnimius, it requires a certain amount of ideas, which most people are not familiar with. Therefore, in order for me to introduce this topic, it is necessary for me also to introduce certain fundamental ideas, which again most people don't know, so that when a person understands these ideas, he will be able to understand the pnimius of Lashon Harah. Now, these ideas are found in the pnimius of Torah, the internal framework of the Torah. They are also referred to as Rozen D'Oraisa, the secrets of Torah. And basically they are found in what's called Kabbalah. And we know what Kabbalah is. Kabbalah really is the esoteric, mystical doctrine of Judaism. That's really what it is. And as such, of course, it's what's called Rozen D'Oraisa, the Seid HaTorah, the secrets of the Torah itself, which was given at Sinai, of course, and transmitted from door to door, even though for a time it wasn't transmitted or was forgotten. Certainly with the advent or the discovery of the Zohar, the rediscovery of the Zohar, of course, it began to again receive much more Gilui or revelation than what it always had. So these ideas which I want to talk about really are found in Kabbalah, but they're ideas which are very necessary to understand in order to understand really the pneumius of Lashon Harah. The first idea which we have to understand is the concept of Spheeris, or Sphera in the singular. What spheres basically are, although there are many ways of looking at it, is that the Ribbono Shel Olam creates 10 forces. 10 forces which they themselves are the fundamental fabric of all creation. All creation are made of these 10 forces. All creation. Not only that, but these are forces. These 10 forces, they themselves create the Bria. Of course, these 10 forces themselves are given their metzius, their existence, and their energy from the Ribbono Shel Olam. But these are the forces that create the entire Bria, and they are really the entire structure, internal structure of all creation, these spheres. Now, there are 10 in number. Now, a lot of these ideas I'm only going to touch on in a superficial manner, just to explain what they are superficially, and then go on. Certainly, here's not the place for any real kind of in-depth treatment. So what I'm going to do, of course, is I'm going to limit myself in giving explanations of them, only to suffice to explain the pneumius of Lashon Harah, because that's really what I want to get to. That's my objective in this particular shiur. In any case, these 10 spheres emanate from the Ribbono Shel Olam. They form the underlying structure of all creation, and they are fundamentally 10 forces. And the names of these spheres are, they are 10 in number: Keser, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, and Malchus. Okay, these are the 10 spheres, and that's what they're called. Now, what is important to understand in these spheres is the following, is that these spheres themselves, or forces, create reality. But these 10 spheres creating reality, it depends on what level. What does that mean? The first level that the 10 spheres appear is called an olam. At that level or at that olam, reality looks a certain way. What do I mean? These 10 spheres, or 10 forces, create reality. Now, when they first appear, the reality they create is an incredible kind. It is a reality in which the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam is completely revealed. The greatest amount of revelation of the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam possible. That level of reality, which is comprised of 10 spheres, is called an olam, a world. I mean, it's an existential reality. And as I said, at that reality, the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam is completely revealed. That reality is called, in Lashon Kabbalah, Adam Kadmoin, or primordial man. Without going into why it's called primordial man. But it's called Adam Kadmoin. That level of reality, in which everything is understood as emanating from the Ribbono Shel Olam, and it's clear, there's no hester at all. There's no concealment of the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam. The yichud of the Ribbono Shel Olam is completely revealed. That is really the level in which we will see in Olam Haba. Olam Haba is really that level. It's Adam Kadmoin. That's Olam Haba. In any case, that's the first level of reality, which the spheres create, so to speak. Then what happens is the spheres are transformed, or they get grosser, thicker. And what happens is they create a second level of reality, in which reality is perceived differently. The Ribbono Shel Olam again is perceived as a yichud. However, it's not as clear as it was in Adam Kadmoin. I'm not going to go more explicitly in the difference between olamas. However, just some kind of explanation as I go down. That second level of reality is called Atzilus. The spheres then create a third level of reality, and that reality is called Bria. Then it creates a fourth level of reality, a different existential set where the presence of Hashem is perceived at a lower level. There's much more Hester. That's called Yetzirah. And the last level of reality, of course, is our world, which is called Asiyah. Therefore, the Spheeris really create all these levels of reality, and they themselves change or become thicker as they sort of, you can use the word descent, as they change and become more and more gross. Then the reality changes, the amount of perception of the yichud of the Rosham changes, and of course the hester, the amount of concealment, of course, grows with each reality. That's very simply what's called an olam. And an olam means, of course, comes from the Hebrew word helem, concealment, because every olam conceals some aspect of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now, when we take a look at these 10 spheres, what is important to know is that there is a difference between the spheres. We distinguish the spheres in terms of the first 3, which are called the Gimel Rishonos. That is either Keseh, Chochma, Bina, some people count it that way, or Chochma, Bina, and Das, Chabad. So either it's Kachav, Keseh, Chochma, Bina, those are the Rosh Tevis of Keseh, Chochma, Bina, or it's Chabad, Chochma, Bina, and Das. Some people count the first 3 one way, some people count the first 3 the other way. In any case, these are the Gimel Rishonos. And the Gimel Rishonos are the highest of the spheres, and they themselves inject or transmit, or what's called the mashpia, and a shefa means a divine force or an influence. They send their shefa or hashpah to the what's called the zayin tachtonis, the lower 7. So you have the Gimel Rishonos, which are the first 3, and they send their shefa or their koyach. They send into the zayin tachtonis the lower 7, and the lower 7 are Chesed, Gvur, and Tferes, or what is called Chagat, Netzach, Hod, Yisoid, what is called Nahi, and Malchus, which is the 7th. So you've got 7, Zayin Tachtonis, you've got Chesed, Gvur, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisoid, and Malchus. All 7 are called the Zayin Tachtonis. Now, the Zayin Tachtonis themselves, the bottom 7 spheres, receive from the Gimel Rishonos. Now, the Zayin Tachtonis itself is subdivided into 2 sets. In the 7, remember, we're talking about the 7 now. You have the first 6 of the 7, and you have the last, which is the 7th. So, the first 6 of the 7 is called Zeranpin, the small countenance. That's what it's called. I'm going into why. But those 6, Chesed, Gvur, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisoid, Chagat, Nahi, those are what's called the Zeranpin. And they are called also a Zohar, a male, because they feed into the 7th, which is Malchus, which is an Akeva, because it receives completely from the 6 above it. So you've got the Gimel Rishonos pouring its Shefa, its divine influence, into the lower 7, and of those lower 7, the 6 pour into the 7th. In many ways, it's like a pipe. And the pipe really is connected to a reservoir. The reservoir is the Gimel Rishonos. The pipe itself is the 6, or the Zerampin, which is the 6th of the bottom group called the 7th. And there's a faucet. That's the 6th sphere of those 7, which is called Yisoid. And that's like a faucet. It's open and it pours into Malchus, which looks like a keli, if I had to use a mushal. Got that? So the reservoir of water is called the Gimel Rishonos. Those 3 pour into what's called the Zayin Tachtonis, B'derech Klal in general. Those Zayin Tachtonis itself are divided into 2 sets. The first 6, which is equivalent to the pipe, and that pours into the last of the 6, which is Yisoid, and that ends, or that set, and that pours into the vessel, which is Malchus, which is the 7th of that second set. I hope that's sufficient explanation. Now, as I said, the Zerampin is called the Zohar because it pours into Malchus, and Malchus is called an Akeva because the essence of Zohar is to thrust or to give, to mashpia or to noisein, to influence or to give. And the essence of a makabel is to receive. The essence of an Akeva, of course, is passivity, is Kabbalah, is a Keli, is to receive. So Malchus, which is the seventh of those seven, or the 10th of the entire set, is an Ikeva, Malchus. And it receives fundamentally from all the 9 above it. Now, the universe was created only with the bottom 7. In fact, the essential idea of the entire Bria is not the Gimel Rishonis, because they're too high. It is the Zayin Tachtonis, the 7 bottom spheres, which really create the entire universe. And where do you see this? Because how many days are there to creation? There are 7. Because 7 spheres, each sphere reigned on one day. And of course the 7th day is Shabbos, which of course is a sphere of Malchus. That's really what will be the influence of the last. We are in in any case, 7 days to 7 days of creation, because 7 spheres created the Bria from Chesed until Malchus. In fact, we see that because we have a pasuk that says Chesed Olam Yeboneh, that the world is created through Chesed. Now, normally Chesed means that the world was created through loving kindness, which means that the Rebbe Hashem didn't have to create the world. He did it because he wants to create a world in which he can bestow what's called enormous hatova, or goodness. But Kabbalistically, that pasuk means Chesed Olam Yiboneh, that the world was created from Chesed. You see, every pasuk doubles up. It can be viewed one way, and it can also be viewed another way. Now, what is very fascinating to know, and certainly it's not the topic of this year, is that this Bria, or rather the 10 spheres, which comprises the whole study of Kabbalah, basically, there are 4 analogues to the mystical structure of the Bria. 4 analogues. The first analog is called the human anatomy. Man looks exactly like the spheres. In other words, another way of putting it is, if you had to take the spheres and create a physical model, a physical paradigm, it would look exactly like a human being, without going into more than that. So the human anatomical structure, all his parts, everything, how it operates, is a direct manifestation of the Spheeris itself. In fact, somebody who understands the correspondence or the parallel between what is in the body and what is in the upper spheres, the spheres and so on, you can figure out exactly what's in the entire universe merely by looking at your body. And that's the soid, the secret of the pasuk that says, Mi besorai erze Elokim, from my flesh I can view God. I can understand the Rebbeinu Shalom. There are many pshatim to that, meanings, but the most fundamental meaning of that is that from the human anatomy itself, one can figure out exactly the entire Bria mystically from the human anatomy. Okay, so the human anatomy is one analog to the Bria. The second analog, and that's the soid, or the secret of that entire structure, was the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is a model of the Bria, or the entire mystical universe, the spheres. The Beis HaMikdash, the division of the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadoshim and so on, is an exact replica of the Bria. In fact, one of the incredible things about the Beis HaMikdash, and that's one of the Soidis, is that the Rebbe Hashem allowed us to manipulate the spiritual worlds, the Ruchnis and Olamas, by interfacing with its counterpart here. In other words, if you interfaced with its parallel here, you would affect its opposite in the Olamas. That's one of the Soidis of the Beis HaMikdash. In any case, that is really what the Beis HaMikdash was, and of course the Shechina occupied the central part of the Beis HaMikdash, just like what's called the Ein Sof occupies the center of the entire mystical universe. But anyway, without going further, so that's the second analog. The Beis HaMikdash is really an analog. It's an exact model or counterpart, parallel to the entire Bria, all the spiritual worlds. The third analog to all the spiritual worlds, and that's why they are so powerful, is called the Oisios, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. That is in itself an exact analog of the entire spiritual universe. And the power of the Aleph Beis, in fact, one of the essence of the power of Shemos, is that it addresses itself to the exact aspect of the spiritual worlds that you want to tap into. That's where the letters get its power from. But that's another analog. And a fourth analog is what's called geometric, that the spheres are described as having a geometry, either a circle or a line, linear or circular. In other words, there's linearity and circularity in the spheres. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that spheres are linear or circular, but it means that there's a certain state in the spheres that in the physical world is called a circle or a line. What it's there, we don't know, but it doesn't make a difference. We know that its counterpart physically is called a line or a circle. But in other words, spheres have different situations to them. So geometry is another way of describing the spheres. And Odom, man, is an exact model in the spheres in the circumstance that they are linear, straight. In fact, if you take a look at a man, you will notice that he really lines up like the spheres, which I'll explain. Let's take the human anatomy. Now, at this point, probably everybody's wondering, what does all this have to do with Lashon Harah? However, we're not far. Just be patient. Let's take a look at the spheres. We know that there are 10. Kesser, Chochma, Bina, Kachav. We have Chesed, Gvur, Tferes, Chagat, Netzach, Hod, Yesoid, Nahi, and we have Malchus. Now, these are in 3 lines, or these 10 spheres are arranged in 3 lines. We have on the right side, we have 3 spheres, which is Chochma, Chesed, and Netzach, or Chachan. Those are the Rosh Tevis of those spheres. On the left side, we have 3 spheres lined up, which is Bago, Bina, Gvura, and Hod. Those are spheres on the left side. And in the middle, we have 4. We have on top Keser, Tferes, Yesoid in Malchus, Katyam. That's the way they relate. So in other words, the 9 are really divided into 3 divisions. 3 on the right, 4 in the middle, and 3 on the left. That's where they line up. And that's called the spheres of Yosher, straight, linear. Now, a human being also looks that way, because a man anatomically resembles structurally the spheres B'Yosher in a straight line. Man on his right side, okay, well, let's take a look at the first 3. You have the skull, okay, which is Keser, and you have the 2 brains, which are Chochma and Bina, okay, and also there's a third sphere called, well, a combination which is called Das, because there's really 3 brains to an individual. In any case, you have the right side of the person, right arm, which is Chesed, his left arm, which is Tferes, Gvura, and you have his torso, which is Tferes. Okay? And then the Netzach is his right side, right leg, so to speak. Hod is his left leg, and Yesoid is the male organ on a man, and Malchus is the Atorah, the crown on that organ. That would be Malchus. In a woman, it's not that, obviously, but Yesoid Malchus is different. Yesoid is the female organ, and the Rechem, the uterus, is Malchus. It's concealed. In any case, you'll notice that a man lines up the way he looks. If you take a look at a stick figure of a person, there's head, torso, right? And then on the right side, you have arm and leg, and arm and leg. He lines up like a stick figure, because in essence, the spheres line up that way. 3, 3, and 4 in the middle. The same thing with an Odom. He lines up exactly like that in a linear fashion. Therefore, the guf of an Odom, the 10 spheres completely follow the guf of an Odom. Now, just like there are spheres in the body, there's also 10 spheres in the head itself. It's apart from the guf. Okay? And fundamentally speaking, you have the skull would be Keser, the eyes are Chochma, the ears are Bina, the nose is Tferes, and basically most of the 6. The tongue is Yesoid, and the mouth is Malchus. That's how it lines up in the head. Okay? So we now see that the human anatomy in his head has 10 spheres, and also the human anatomy in terms of the entire body also has 10 spheres. Now, once we understand this, we now can begin to understand certain interesting ideas. We see that the Lashon, the tongue, is Keneged Yesod, is Keneged the sphere called Yesod, which is foundation. Okay? And the mouth is Keneged or parallels to Malchus. Now I said, remember, that Yesod is the 9th sphere, in terms of all 10, that pours into Malchus. Or, when you take a look at the Gimel Rishonis, you have the bottom 7, and the bottom 7 itself, Zayin Tachtonis, are divided into 2 sets. The first 6 all pour into Yesod, because that's the bottom of the 6, and that pours into the 7th, which is Malchus. So Yesod is the area where all the Shefa pours out from all the 9 above into Malchus, which receives it, and then creates the entire Bria, or at least the world below it, it creates. So Yesod is a very pivotal point, a point of exit, so to speak, of all the Shefa, all the divine forces that combine and pour out into that Yesod, and then into the Malchus. Now the tongue is Keneged the Lashon, the tongue is Keneged Yesod. Now, once we understand this, we now understand that when you do an Avera, using a certain organ, you defect or you damage the particular sphere that is the analog of that anatomical region. If the Yesod is the Lashon, if the tongue of a person parallels the sphere of Yesod, as he manifests, of course, all the spheres, then if a person speaks Lashon Harah, he damages the Yesod. He does what's called his poigim the Yesod. He damages the Yesod. Because when you use your tongue to speak Lashon Harah, you are using that area or that organ which represents the sphere of Yesod, and he damages the flow that comes out of that Yesod, and because he damages it, he splits the Yesod from the Malchus. In other words, the sphere of Yesod, which pours all its forces into Malchus, which is below it, which is the 10th, the flow is disrupted. It's disrupted because he's damaged the Yesod because of Lashon Harah. The pnimius of Lashon Harah is that it interferes with the proper flow from Yesod to Malchus, or that proper force from one sphere into the other. It damages the flow because the Lashon represents Yesod. So therefore, when he speaks Lashon Harah, using of course his tongue, which is the primary organ of speech, he damages the sphere of Yesod, and that itself has enormous repercussions for the entire well-being of the Bria, because the entire creation stands in harmony only because all the forces line up correctly. When you speak Lashon Harah and you damage Yesod, then the forces, of course, are misaligned spiritually, and therefore tremendous damages occur throughout all creation, because all of it has to funnel correctly into Malchus, and then the world is created from those correct forces. However, if they are interfered with and they are misaligned, then there are enormous repercussions throughout the entire creation, certainly throughout the entire physical universe. Now, we now understand, although we don't see it clear, it's certainly the way it expresses itself in history, but we now understand the sod, or the secret of Lashon Harah, is that Lashon Harah has a unique ability of damaging the sphere of Yesod, which is the counterpart of the Lashon, of the tongue. And that has tremendous repercussions through creation. Certainly, since Yesod, which is the 9th sphere, and it is that sphere which all the 9 above it pour into the 10th, which is the receptacle of all those 9, clearly, obviously, if the flow is disturbed, obviously, below it, or what Malchus is able to produce, is obviously also disturbed. Now, once you begin to understand this, that since Yesod is the major point or exit point of the shefa of all those divine forces into Malchus, and from there it goes into all creation, then obviously Lashon Harah is extremely damaging to the entire Bria. Once you understand this, we can understand a very fundamental problem. We know that in the beginning, and now you'll begin to see many ideas in the Torah are understood now that you have this framework. The Nachash, who was a Satan, the snake, who was a physical manifestation, of course, of the Satan, he was, of course, had to tempt Adam v'Chava to eat from the tree. Eat from the Eitz Hadas Tevorah, tree of knowing good and evil. But what was his argument? He said the following: if you eat from the tree, you will be like God. This is what he said. What does that mean, you'll be like God? What he told Chava, and eventually she told us to Adam, is that, look, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not the sole being in the Bria, in creation. In other words, there is an independent being and force that exists besides the Rebbeinu Shalom. What is that? It is the tree, the Eitz Hadas Tevorah. By the way, this pshat, of course, is the Medrash, which Rashi brings down. In other words, the tree is an independent Bria, existence, being from God. Not only that, the Nachash said, but the Rebbeinu Shalom got his power from the tree. So not only is the tree independent from the Rebbeinu Shalom, but the Rebbeinu Shalom is not as great as you think he is. You think he's omnipotent. Not true. The tree is the source of omnipotence. And the Rebbeinu Shalom himself derived his power from the power of the tree. This is what he says, of course, to Chava. What was and now what happened as a result of that? Chava, of course, and Adam ate from the tree. So they were choite, they sinned. In other words, what they really should have understood is the following, and this is really what the Satan tempted Adam and Chava. They knew that the Rebbeinu Shalom is Shlita, Yichud Shlitosai, all-powerful being, because they came at the end of creation, the sixth day. They knew they didn't make it. They couldn't fool themselves in that way. So they knew the Rebbeinu Shalom was incredible in power. But they didn't know that the Rebbeinu Shalom was not only Yichud Shlitosai. What was concealed from them is that it's a Yichud Mitziusai, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is the only thing that exists. There is no other independent being besides the Rebbeinu Shalom, let alone another being that gave the Rebbeinu Shalom the power to do it. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the only being that exists truly, and everything else emanates from him. And what the Rebbeinu Shalom did, of course, is he created a tree that people should think perhaps that there's an independent being from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because he wanted Adam, Adam knew that God is a Yichud Shlitosai, but he didn't know he's a Yichud Mitziusai. What he was supposed to, of course, see is that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a Yichud Mitziusai, he's the only thing that exists. And he was supposed to see that what the Nachash was saying, of course, was false. So he failed. He bought the argument. He thought that the tree also was an independent being. Not only was it an independent being, but also, in other words, that there is a place for independent beings besides the Rebbeinu Shalom, and of course that the tree was superior in potency than the Rebbeinu Shalom, because the Rebbeinu Shalom himself derived his power from the tree. Adam failed in that reasoning, in that, of course, test, and same thing with Chava. Now, but one thing is very strange. What do we see here? That the snake spoke Lashon Harah about the Rebbeinu Shalom. The snake spoke Lashon Harah, Moitzi Shemra, and Mechilis all together about the Rebbeinu Shalom. Where do you see this? Because first of all, he said that the Rebbeinu Shalom is not an independent being, or rather that there are independent beings besides the Rebbeinu Shalom, correct? And not only that, but the tree is superior. That is a lie. The tree was not superior. The tree is not even independent. So that's clearly Moitzi Shemra. What the Nachash is doing is he is degrading the stature of the Rebbeinu Shalom in the eyes of Adam v'Chava. That is Lashon Harah. But since the information whereby he degraded the Rebbeinu Shalom is false, therefore that kind of Lashon Harah is called Moitzi Shemra, defamation. But there was another problem here. He was also speaking Rechilis against the Rebbeinu Shalom. What is Rechilis? Not only do you defame somebody, but you cause the receiver or the listener to hate the person you've spoken about. How did he do it? Because he said, the Rebbeinu Shalom, why didn't the Rebbeinu Shalom reveal to you this knowledge, that he himself is not the only being, that there's a tree that exists independent from him and the tree is more powerful? Why did the Rebbeinu Shalom do this to you? Why didn't he want to tell you this? Because he doesn't want you to eat from the tree. Because if you eat from the tree, you will be as powerful as him. So he's not interested in your well-being. He's jealous of you. He doesn't want you to become another god. So when Adam heard that, what would Adam think about the Rebbeinu Shalom? Not only is the Rebbeinu Shalom what? Not only is he dependent on the tree, not only is the tree independent, not only is the Rebbeinu Shalom dependent on the tree and the tree is superior, automatically the amount of stature that the Rebbeinu Shalom has, his omnipotence is degraded, A. But not only that, but there's a sinner, a hatred that develops between Adam and the Rebbeinu Shalom, because Adam now thinks that the Rebbeinu Shalom fooled him. He's not dealing honestly with him. He fooled him. He deceived him. So there's a sinner, a hatred that develops from Adam to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That is called Rechilus. When the Satan told that to Adam, and Adam therefore developed a hatred, that is Rechilus. So it comes out, and in the first recorded conversation in human history, or in the Torah, you already had Lashon Harah, Motzei Shemra, and Rechilus all in one. Why did the Nochosh, the snake, the Satan, or as he is known as a Sitra Achor, why did he want Adam to believe this, or to listen and believe this Lashon Harah? Because the Satan knew that if Adam is makabel the Lashon Harah, believes the Lashon Harah, he will be poigim his Yesod, right? He will be poigim the Yesod because Lashon Harah damages the sphere of Yesod, and the divine force that goes from Yesod to Malchus would be interrupted. That's what the Nochosh wanted. Therefore, not only did the Nochosh, the snake, want Adam to what? To believe, or rather to eat from the tree, Eitz Hadas Tevara, but he wanted Adam and Chava to makabel Lashon Harah, so that the force that goes from Yesod to Malchus would be interrupted or deflected. That's why. That's why Lashon Harah is in the first recorded conversation in history. It's not by accident. The Satan knew what he wanted. Now, why does the Satan want to do that? Why should he want to do that? Because he wants to damage the flow from Yesod to Malchus. In other words, he wants to split the Yesod from Malchus, that the flow doesn't go into Malchus directly. He wants the Shefa to be blocked and diverted. But why? Why should he want that? And the answer is because then the Satan, he can take from the Shefa of Yesod. That's why. He wanted it. Therefore, by getting Adam to receive Lashon Harah, to makabel Lashon Harah, then the Satan can take or yonik from the Yesod itself, deflect the Kedusha, the enormous holiness that comes out of that sphere, and instead of going into Malchus, it's deflected so the Satan is yonik from the Yesod, which is a mind-boggling thing. What does that do for the Satan? What it does is it gives him a mokum, a place in creation. Since he's receiving the Shefa, he now exists in the physical universe equal to man. He wants a mokum. So right after Adam and Chava believed that, and they ate from the tree, the Satan now stood equal to Adam in the Bria, in the physical universe. That's what happened. And how do you see this? Because he was able to enter the physical body of man. Because now the Satan is in the body, and the Neshama is in the body. Both. They both have a mokum, a place in the body. And the Satan was able to do that by damaging the Yesod and diverting the Shefa to himself. And how did he do that? By getting Adam to receive Lashon Harah. That's how he did it. Now, what do we see so far? That the Satan therefore can be yonik from that sphere, the Kedusha of that sphere, from Yesod. Okay? And the interesting thing about it is that once that happens, he now has a place in creation. Because the snake, prior to the sin of Adam Rishon, the Chet Adam Rishon, was external to the universe, the physical universe. He can only offer Adam and Chava an argument, but he couldn't give him a drive because he wasn't in the physical universe. Now, however, he has a place in the physical universe, and of course his argument is different. Now, as a result of the fact that the Satan now receives this Kedusha, so that's what Chazal mean that he was matal b'zoyama in Chava, that the Satan, so to speak, not literally, but Nochosh bo'al Chava, that the Nochosh lived with Chava. In other words, the Medrash says that he lived with Chava, he was matal b'zoyama, into Chava. What is Zuma? Zuma is the shefa, or the force, or the influence of the Satan. That's his influence. Okay? So as a result of the fact that he could be yonik from the Yesod, he now can take that shefa and inject it into Chava, except what would go into Chava isn't the Kedusha of Yesod, but rather it is filtered, of course, through the Satan. It's the Zoyim of the Satan. The pollution or the filth of the Satan now can go into Chava. So in many ways, the Satan becomes the Zohar. And Chava, who is really an Nekeva, who really stands for Malchus, she would be received the Zoyma of the Satan. Yeah. Therefore, this is sort of a result of what happens. Now, there are many important ideas that emerge from this, that Chava received the Zoyama from the Satan that he was able to give her, because he now takes the place of the Zohar, because he's yonik from the Yesod. He takes from the Yesod. Let's take a look at two very important ideas that emerge from this framework. The first idea is, remember, that Adam anatomically mirrors the state of the Spheeris. If the Spheeris change, so does man. In fact, that's really the secret of the change of man. That's why he changes, is because the spiritual worlds change, and he therefore mirrors that change. And that, by the way, is the secret of all disease. Because when you do a chet, it's pogam, it damages some aspect of the sphere, which you represent, and that automatically comes back on you and damages your organ. That organ which represents that sphere which was damaged as a result of the sin, which is a parallel to that sphere. In fact, a doctor, Kabbalistic doctor, wouldn't prescribe medicine, he would prescribe the mitzvah to masaken, to rectify that sphere which damaged the organ as a result of the chet in that organ. That's usually the way that's how they would work. However, don't ask me any names and addresses of these guys. In any case, I don't think they're licensed by the AMA anyway. But anyway, that's how they would work Kabbalistically, because that's really the inherent, what is the cause of disease? Not what people think, which is bacteria and germs and viruses. No, what is inherently the cause of disease is a damage in the oilimus, the Spheeris, which you are an analog of. And the way you disrupt it is by doing a chet to a particular, using a certain organ, which damages the sphere, which parallels that organ, which then reverses itself and now damages the organ, and that's why people get sick. So obviously the proper way of going around that, of course, would be a tikkun of that sphere. But obviously, there are not that many people that are versed in the analogs and so on. The Ari was able to do that. And obviously, certain very great Mekubolim, they could know exactly what tikkun you could do, because they knew the pagam, or the defect, in the oilimus, in the world. That's how they knew exactly what you had to do to get out of what sorrow you were in. They could bypass the entire physical universe. However, all this is an aside. Now, Adam, we said, mirrors the entire oilimus, right? Elyonis, all the spiritual universes, the spheres, and anatomically. Now, what did we say? What we said is that as a result of him being the Lashon Harah, correct? Therefore, the shefa, the force or the flow of holiness which comes from Yesod into Malchus is disrupted. Therefore, what that means is that anatomically, Adam has to mirror that defect in the spheres. Where do you see he mirrored it? Because Chazal say that Adam was born mohol, circumcised. He was born without an olah, without a foreskin that would cover the male organ. There was no such thing as an olah. It didn't exist. Why? Because Yesod, which is represented by the male organ, pours unimpeded into Malchus. However, once he was Mekabel Lashon Harah, and Yesod was damaged, and the Satan could be yonik, all of a sudden the olah would grow, and it's exactly what happened. He grew an olah, a foreskin, which covered the Yesod, or the male organ. That is why Adam, man, has an olah, because that's the defect in the sphere. You see, in fact, the word olah, now why did this happen? Because, why did the olah grow? Because it mirrors the defect in the sphere of Yesod, which of course that organ represents. So the foreskin covers that organ. And how did it happen? How was the Satan able to split the Yesod from Malchus? Because Adam believed Lashon Harah, which was damaged his tongue, which is Yesod. Therefore, Ola itself is comprised of two words, Lamed Harah, Lashon Harah. In other words, the way to grow the Ola, or to conceal the Yesod, is by speaking or believing Lashon Harah. Because that is the counterpart. The Ola is the counterpart, of course, or what it means is that Yesod and Malchus are split. And that's really what the Ola does. So the word itself reveals how it itself is generated, Lashon Harah. In fact, the word Sitra Achra, which of course means a Satan and his entire side, the gematria of Sitra Achra is Malshinim. Malshinim is the gematria of Sitra Achra, because that's how the Satan derives most of his power. And as I said, when the Satan derives his power because of Lashon Harah, he was able to inject Zoyama, pollution, into Chava. Therefore, the gematria of Bo Nochesh al Chava also is Sitra Achra, because that's also the same thing. In other words, Malshinim is the same gematria as Sitra Achra, because Malshinim gives the power to Sitra Achra, and the result of Sitra Achra is Bo Nochesh al Chava. He's able to give the Zoyama into the entire physical universe, because that's the result of the whole concept of Sitra Achra. Anyway, so therefore Adam grew an Ola, and Ola itself is the oasis of Lamed Harah, which indicates that is how the Ola grows. Now, this is what we see so far. Therefore the word Ola, or rather Ola, which grew after the Chet of Adam Rishon, itself reveals what generates it, which of course is Lashon Harah. The word Ola is Lamed Harah, or Lashon Harah. Now, how do we correct this defect? How do we correct the defect that Adam did? And the answer is Milah. What do you do by Milah? By circumcision. You take off the Ola. Now what do you do with this Ola? Now the Ola, we know, represents the Zoyama, because that's what conceals. What conceals the Yesod? The Zoyama. It's the Shefa, the force of the Satan. He's being unique from this Yesod, and he's being matalit into the Bria. And that's what's hiding the whole thing, is Zoyama. So the Ola is really the physical analog of the Zoyama itself. So therefore, what the Rebbe wants is for Jews to remove the Ola. How do you remove the Ola? Through Milah, circumcision. You remove the foreskin, correct? What do you do when you remove the Ola? You throw it into the ground, because the Ola is the chelik, or the part that belongs to the Satan. Therefore we throw it into the ground, because it's from the Adoma that the Satan has a shlitum in the physical universe. In any case, so therefore we perform Milah. And what's the idea of Milah? Milah does what? It reveals the Yesod. It reveals the Yesod, so that the Yesod can again flow into the Malchus. That's really what Milah does. That is why Milah is gematria Peh. The gematria of Milah is 85, and the gematria, the numerical value of Peh, is also 85. And what is Peh? Peh is connected Malchus. Because the idea of Milah is to reverse or to reveal the Yesod, so it can again pour its Kedusha, its holiness, into the Malchus. Now the analog of Malchus to the human anatomy, of course, is Peh, the mouth. Therefore the gematria, the numerical equivalent of Milah, is Peh, which of course means, in the sphere analog, it means Malchus. So the concept is to megal the Yesod, or again to mechaber, to connect the Yesod with Malchus. That's the essence of the whole matter. And when that happens, what happens to the Bria? There's a tikkun in the Bria. Therefore, the secret of Milah, now you begin to understand what the secret of Milah, and why is it called an ois? What is an ois? There are certain mitzvahs in the Torah which are called ois, a sign. It is a sign of the agreement that exists between the Rebbe and Klal Yisrael. Why is Milah called a sign? Because what was disrupted mystically or kabbalistically or pneumius, internally, the flow that goes from Yesod to Malchus was disrupted. And the Satan, it bypasses to the Satan, and he derives benefit, and he's able to give Zoyama because of it. Therefore, what the Rebbe wants is to remove the influence of the Satan, his Zoyama, and to mechaber, to connect Yesod back to Malchus. Therefore, what the Rebbe said is to a Jew, what? I want you to remove the foreskin, which is Milah, so you can reveal the Yesod, so it's again connected to Malchus, to masakin the malchus that it joins with Yesod. So therefore, what the Jew does is he removes the foreskin, he reveals Yesod, and it again connects together with malchus. Then the flows go correctly, and all of a sudden the whole Bria, the universe, has the right flow of Kedusha, holiness, and all of a sudden the Shekhinah, the presence of God, is revealed throughout creation, because that's what's stopping it. The presence of the Roshim cannot be revealed because it's not coming down from the higher Olamas correctly into this world. But through Mila, you remove the Hester, which is the Ola, which is the Zoyama, and now Yesod is connected to Malchus, Nischaber to Malchus. The flow comes into Malchus, into the entire Bria, and there it is, the Gilu of the Shekhinah. Now, this is called an Ois. What does it mean that it's called an Ois? Because it is an actual sign of the agreement. What is the agreement between us and the Roshim? That we bring a tikkun to the Bria, correct? And that if we bring a tikkun to the Bria, if we rectify creation, we will experience its rectification. What is the rectification of the Bria? What's the damage? The damage to creation is that God, the Rebbe Hashem, is not revealed to creation. We rectify that and we again reveal God to the creation. But we know now, Pnimius, why? Because Yesod is not connected to Malchus. Therefore, what happens is we therefore have to masakin Yesod. We have to again connect Yesod to Malchus. The flow comes down into Malchus, and when the flows come back in, then of course the Shekhinah again is of course revealed. Therefore, the Roshim says, I will give you an Ois, a sign that is an exact replica or exact statement of what lies between me and you. You will remove the Ola, the Zoyama, remove the influence of the Nachash, the Sitra Achra, the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, right? You remove that, you will expose the Yesod as it is connected to the Atara Malchus, right? When is this done? On the 8th day. Because the 8th day is the beginning of Olam Haba, because it is after Zayin Tachtonis, all the 7 Spheeris, which are the 7 days of creation, and the 8th day is the beginning of Odom Kadmon in that sense. Therefore, if you do remove the Ola, which is the Zoyama, and you again reveal or Mechaber, connect Yesod to the Malchus, where its flow is now harmonious and so on, then on the 8th day you will experience that restoration of the correct flow. And the 8th day begins, of course, Olam Haba, because it's after the 7,000th year. We know that Olam Hazeh is only 6,000 years. The 7,000th year, the world is desolate for 1,000 years. And in the beginning of the 8,000th year, Olam Haba, the process of Olam Haba begins. Therefore, Mila happens on the 8th day because the very act which you do, which is to remove the Zoyama, to remove the Ola, which produces the Giloi of the Yesod, which is the Shekhinah, the Rebbe Shalom, that will happen to you on the 8th day, and that's your Chelek. Therefore, in one act is the complete statement of the agreement between us and the Rebbe Shalom. Therefore, Mila is called an Ois. So that's really what we do. We remove the foreskin, the Zoyama, we allow for the chibur, the connection between Yesod and Malchus, and as a result of that, everything is Nisgala, the Shekhinah is Nisgala, which happens, of course, on the 8th day, Be'ika, which is the beginning of Olam Haba. Anyway, we see, therefore, that as a result of Adam Mechaber's Chet, we see what happens anatomically to Adam. It's not by chance that this happened, but the anatomical structure, as I said before, is an analog to the whole Ruchnis Tigay Lamas, exactly man mirrors the conditions, or the condition of the Spheeris. Now, what happened to Chava? That was Adam. What happened to Chava? When the Nachash brought the Zoyama into the world, who was the one that it went through first? Chava. He was Matal Bo Zoyama. He put the Zoyama in her. What happened, therefore, is he damaged her Malchus, because the Zoyama entered her, and she received Shefa, or rather Zoyama Tuma. She received pollution from the Satan. Therefore, her Malchus was damaged. What is her Malchus? Her Rechem, her uterus, was damaged. Spiritually, it was damaged. Therefore, there must be a defect in her uterus, which is Nida. The reason why Nida came about is because she allowed the Zoyama to enter into her, but her anatomical region, which corresponds to Malchus, is her rechem, which is her uterus, her womb, right? Therefore, that would suffer a pagam. What was the pagam? Nida. That 12 times a year, or whatever, she would have to experience death in the uterus, where the egg would be lost, and so on. Now, Nida does not make sense. Why does a woman have to go through this process? Where she has an egg that implants itself on the walls of the uterus, and all of a sudden, if it's not fertilized, it's out. Why? Why is there misa in the life-giving place called the rechem? And the answer is because that's the chilik of the zoyama, the damage that she did by believing Lashon Harah and allowing the nachash, the snake, to be unique from Yitzhak. That's the damage that she reflects in the pagam, in the defect that she did to the Spheeris. But it reflects itself in her organ, which of course is her malchus, which is of course her uterus. So that's the concept of nida. And that is why nida is so important, because at the time that a woman's a nida, there's a shlita of the zoyama at that time, which is very strong. So if a person lives with his wife who's a nida, it strengthens the hands of the Satan, because that's the time that the zoyama is very strong in her. Therefore, by observing nida, a woman brings her tikkun to the world by rectifying what she did, which of course means that she was the first that believed Lashon Harah, and that's really what she did. She believed Lashon Harah, and she went over to Adam to convince him, and she didn't have to do that. She could have said, look, I fell for his argument. Why should I destroy my husband? But she didn't look at that, because she was jealous. Maybe the Russian would give him another wife, which is what the Medrash says. So she willingly destroyed her husband. Therefore, the major defect of the Zoyama occurs in a woman because of that chet. In any case, that's what happened to Chava as a result of the Lashon Harah that she was makabel. And that was the damage in her malchus. And what we begin to see also, very interesting, well, okay. In any case, this is what we see. Now, we now understand a very important idea. What Lashon Harah does. Why it was so important. Why the Nachash used it, employed it in his first argument. We see how central it is to the whole Bria. Because Lashon Harah is pogam the Yesod, it separates the Yesod from Malchus, it stops the flow or disrupts the flow, so the whole Kedusha can't flow into the Bria, and therefore he's able to be Matal Zoyma into the Bria as a result of the Lashon Harah. Now, by Cain, we see therefore by Adam that Adam allowed the Satan to be equal to an Adam. He allowed the Satan to be equal to an Adam in this world. Cain, however, did it worse. He gave what's called shlita, or dominion, to the Satan by his chet. When Cain killed Hevel, what he did is he allowed the Satan not only to be equal to Adam, but the Satan now rules over man. He gave shlita to the Satan. And in fact, the Torah indicates it or alludes it when it says, La Pesach chatas roivetz, sin lies in wait at the entrance, at the door. What's the Pesach? The mouth. Sin waits at the mouth, because Lashon Harah is what fuels chet, therefore it lies at the entrance. It waits for Lashon Harah. That's why it says, La Pesach chatas roivetz. The Torah actually almost spells it out to you, without literally spelling it out to you. The power of the mouth. And this is what happened to Cain, and that is the significance of what Cain did, is that he, of course, allowed the Satan to have dominion over Adam. And then from Cain it was much worse, until the end of Noach, until the whole world was destroyed, and the flood, of course, indicates the complete dominion over the world by the Satan as a result of the corruption of the world, and so on. Now, what do we see, therefore? That there are two phases here. There's a phase where the Satan has equality with man, and there's a phase where the Satan has dominion over man. Both are very important ideas. We also see that Lashon Harah damages the Yesod, which of course interrupts the flow. It allows the Satan to give the Zoyama into the Bria. And the reversal of that is the Tikkun, is to take Yesod and to reconnect it to Malchus, and that will Megala the Shechina and bring a whole Tikkun to the world. Therefore, once you understand this, we can now go on and see another idea. Okay, now, once we understand this, we can now understand a very important idea. The inyan, or the matter, the subject matter of what's called Pekida and the Zechira. In Yalav Yovoi, when we ask, that the Rosham should send the Mashiach and so on, we say V'yi Poked, V'yi Zocher. They're both Lashonis of being remembered. What is Pekidah and Zechira? And you'll find when the Rosham approached Moshe Rabbeinu, he said, Pokei Pokadati, I have surely remembered the afflictions of the Jews and I come to take them out. Not only that, but Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to Klal Yisrael, he said that the Rosham remembered you. Pokei, that he remembered you. He had to use the expression of Pekidah, and Klal Yisrael knew he was the Mashiach because he used the right language. And when Yosef was dying, he said, don't forget me, Pokei Tifkoid, you should remember me. What is this Lashon Pekidah? Now you will understand. What the Pekidah really is, we see so far that when Yesod, that the whole Pegam in the Bria basically is Yesod is disconnected from Malchus. And it is our task to bring them together so the flows align themselves, and then the whole Shekhinah in this Gala is revealed, the divine presence is revealed. Therefore, when the Yesod is reconnected to Malchus, Yesod is Neschabat to Malchus, that's called the Pekidah. That is an event of enormous proportions, because that is really what the Tikkun is, that Yesod is reconnected to Malchus. Now it does so under the influence of the sphere right above it, in the middle line, which is Spheeris. When Spheeris influences Yesod to reconnect to Malchus, that's called the Pekidah. And what that does, anyway, Kabbalistically that's what it is, mystically, is when Spheeris is mashpia, or generates enormous amount of force to reconnect Yesod to Malchus. And then everything becomes realigned in that sense. That is a very important event. What happens? Because when that happens, then the Satan can't be unique as much anymore. So he loses his dominion, but he still maintains a place. But he loses dominion. He has no more power over Adam. He's equal to Adam. When that happens, he has to release all the neshamas kedushas, the holy souls that are in his power. Now we know that there are certain neshamas, there are certain entities or beings in the hands of the klipa, the zoyama, the Satan. So what are they? First of all, Moshe Rabbeinu is in the klipa, which means that the Satan is able to envelop Moshe and not allow his neshama to receive or. The Yisurin that these people go through, which I will mention, is what's called miat or, diminishment of or, of kedusha, which they should have proportionately to their great neshama. So when they suffer miat or, that's an enormous tikkun. The one that makes them suffer the miat or is the Satan, because he's able to envelop them and stop the kedusha from going to them. That's called sivlei chiloim, those people that suffer illnesses, sicknesses. And the reason why they suffer that is in order to allow Jews to rectify creation. Because they could not do it based on their own suffering, they need the suffering also of these neshamas. Who are the major neshamas which are in the klipa, which are in the hands of the Satan, and as a result of that are aiding Klal Yisrael to rectify creation, Yesod back to Malchus? Those are called sivlei chiloim, the ones who bear sickness for the sake of Klal Yisrael. Who are they? Moshe Rabbeinu, the two Mashiachim, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, and all the other neshamas kedoshim of tzaddikim that are also in the klipa. And the greatest thing in the klipa is the Shekhinah, is the Rebbeinu Shalom, not Chas v'Shalom the Rebbeinu Shalom, but rather the representation, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is also in the hands of the klipa. Not Chas v'Shalom, it is at the mercy of the Satan, of course not, but that the Rebbeinu Shalom allows the Satan to be unique from the Shekhinah itself. So therefore there's a statement called Shechinta b'Galusa, that the Shekhinah itself is in Golus. And what that means is that the Rebbeinu Shalom allows the Satan to derive a certain amount of energy from the power of the divine presence itself. And that's a tremendous benefit to Klal Yisrael, without going into why. However, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, all the great neshamas, Moshe Rabbeinu and the two Mashiachim, they are all in the hands of the klipa. They are suffering what's called miat or. They do not have the kedusha that they should have, which is appropriate to their enormous neshamas. they are released at the time of the Pekida, because the Satan can't be unique from the Yesod as much, therefore he must release them. Therefore he has no more dominion over man, instead he merely occupies a place. So therefore what Cain did is neutralized. And we are now back to the stage of Odom Rishon, right after the Chet, okay? Where the Satan has a mokum, he has a place, but not a dominion. This is the Pekida. The Pekida is an incredible, mind-boggling, mystical, Kabbalistic event where Yesod is Neschaber to Malchus. The sphere of Yesod again is connected to Malchus through the influence of Spheeris, which is, of course, right above it. That Kabbalistic event is central to the Geula. In fact, that is the Geula. And the thing that is released at that time is the soul of the Mashiach. And the soul of the Mashiach is called Yechido, because that's the essence of the soul of the Mashiach. The Yechido, without going into all the details, the Yechido is an aspect of the soul which is defined as the Mashiach. That is the crown of the Mashiach. That is released from the Klippa, from the hands of the Satan. And that, of course, goes back on the Mashiach, and the Mashiach then becomes Mashiach at that time of Pekida. So the Moshe told Moshe Rabbeinu, I now, Pokaditi, I remembered you, which means that the Pekida happened. That's the essence of the concept of Pekida. So therefore, Pekida is when Yesod is connected to Malchus through the influence of Spheeris, and even though they are released, but there's no revelation of them because evil still has a place. The Zechira is the second stage. Kabbalistically, it's when Tiferes joins with Yesod and Malchus together, all three. And as a result of that, that's called Zechira. And what that does, it produces a Giloi, a revelation. Not merely an emancipation, but a revelation of the Shechina and Mashiach ben Yosef. And of course, certainly Mashiach ben David. And there's a Giloi, and that is mamish the Messianic era. Now the Pekida is especially true of Mashiach ben Yosef, when there is a release, it's a release of these neshamas and so on, Yechid and so on. And the Giloi of the Zechira, that's be'ika appropriate, of course, to the time of Mashiach ben David. And by the Zechira, when the release of the, or rather the revelation of the Shechina and the Mashiach and ben David and so on, which is the true Yemoisa Mashiach, evil doesn't even have a mokum, it has no place. That's when evil is completely obliterated. It is destroyed. So we now see what the concepts of Pekida and Zechira. So therefore when the Rebbe told Moshe Rabbeinu, Pokoit Pokadati, because the Pekida had arrived. And it's interesting, where do you see that? Because when did the Pekida happen? Because it says by the Rebbe, Vayeda Elokim, and God knew. And he knew what? That the time had come. Yediyah, knowing, is always an expression of intimacy. It says Vayeda Odom es Chava, and man knew Chava. That's a Lashon Nikiya of what? Of sexual intimacy. Yesod Malchus really is really the counterpart of sexual intimacy in the physical analog is really the chib of Yesod Malchus. In any case, so when it says Vayeda Elokim, and God knew, that was the Pekida Kabbalistically. That's when it really happened. The Rebbe knew when a man knows his wife. What does that really refer to? That's really when they're both intimate with each other. What does that mean? That's really the zivug of Yesod Malchus, because those really are the organs involved. That is the exact that anatomic relationship is the exact parallel to the Spheeris of Yesod Malchus connecting. That's the zivug, because that's really what a zivug is. It's Yesod Malchus, whether it be done here between a man and a woman, or whether it be done in the Spheeris. That's why it says Vayeda Elokim. The Rosham knew that's mamish the Pekida, Yesod Malchus, and then lady told Moshe Rabbeinu, Pokoid Pokadati, I surely have remembered. And as we will see in a minute, of course, that the reason why this happened is because of Shmiras Halashon. That's how they were able to bring Yesod Malchus together. In any case, this is the concept of Pekida and Zechira, and we find also in Yalav Yovoy, that's why it says V'yi Pokeid, V'yi Zocher, that we should be Zecher to both. This is what we see because we understand the different ideas of what happened, of Yesod Malchus, that it was split, and the main thing is to bring them together again, and then to have Tiferes join, and those are the two stages of Geula. Now, once we understand the Pekida and the Zechira, in other words, the Pekida is really the emancipation, Chiras, of all these neshamas and so on, because of the connection between Yesod Malchus, under the influence of Tiferes, And that Be'ika is Nogea to the time of Ben Yosef, and Zechira, of course, is the connection between Yesod Malchus with Tiferes, and that's Be'ika, the revelation. Begiloi, that's Be'ika, that's essentially under the time of Mashiach ben David, and that, of course, is a time when evil is completely destroyed. Now, let's take a look and see how we see this mamish in the Torah. Let's take a look at Yosef. Yosef, what happened to Yosef? Yosef HaTzadik. Now, Yosef is what? HaTzadik. Yosef, without going into what that means, is an individual that personified or was especially under the influence of what's called Yesod. The sphere of Yesod had an enormous amount of shlita or influence over Yosef. In fact, Tzaddik Yesod Olam. Right? That Tzaddik is the foundation of the world. Tzaddik refers to Yesod, and Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef is really an individual that was incredibly influenced by that particular sphere called Yesod. Yehuda, who is Malchus, he is particularly influenced by the sphere called Malchus. Now, what was the story of Yosef and Yehuda? That Yosef got sold. In other words, Yehuda was responsible in many ways for selling Yosef. Why did that happen? Because Yosef spoke Lashon Harah, remember? Yosef used to walk over to his father and told his father about the sins that his brother was committing. Now, it was Lashon Harah. Now, even though Yosef had mind to correct his brothers, he didn't mean it maliciously, but the halacha is he should not have gone to his father to say that because it was Lashon Harah. He should first have gone to his brothers and told them directly, hopefully they would change. Instead, he didn't go to his brothers. He went to his father. Therefore, that is classified as Lashon Harah. And as a result of that, Yosef spoke Lashon Harah. Therefore, Yesod, he was poigim as Yesod, especially an individual who was influenced most by the sphere of Yesod. He was poigim it, damaged it, so he split Yesod Malchus. That caused the Satan to have enormous powers over Yehuda, where eventually Yosef and Yehuda split. That mamish, that actually split Yosef from Yehuda. Because that's what Lashon Harah does. It splits the Yesod from Malchus. Therefore, that is really one of the major reasons why Yehuda wound up selling Yosef, of course, into slavery. That split it. Again, we see. And the interesting thing about it, which is a very, very great pneumius, is Yosef suffered because of that. Because Gemara says, what is that which can repair the damage of Yesod that Lashon Harah does? The answer is Torah. That the Gemara says, my takante, what's the takana? When you speak Lashon Harah, which really means what's the takana of Yesod, is Torah. If you learn Torah, it brings back the Yesod to Malchus. Because Torah is used literally in the same organ. Torah you learn with your mouth. Right? So Torah is one of the mitzvahs that can reconnect Yesod to Malchus. That's why it's a takana. Therefore, since Yosef damaged Yesod from Malchus by speaking Lashon Harah about his brothers to his father Yaakov, therefore one of the things that he was punished with is he forgot all his learning. In fact, that's one of the reasons why Menashe was named Menashe, because Yosef said he forgot his learning. So therefore, he suffered a tremendous amount of forgetting of learning which he learned from his father. Remember it says Ben Zikunim? That means his father taught him everything that he had learned in Shem Be'eva, the Yeshiva Shem Be'eva, he taught to Yosef. So Yosef fundamentally forgot that learning, and he bemoaned that fact even by naming his son Menashe, which means also to forget. He forgot the learning. Why? Because since he spoke Lashon Harah, that split the Yesod from the Malchus, therefore Torah was nivgam also. The Torah itself was defected. Therefore, that's one of the reasons. And also, he also was poigim the Yesod milmato, which is the Yesod as it represents in the guf. And that's one of the reasons why he had the test with Potiphara's wife, which of course is a test of the Yesod, right, in the body. Not merely the Yesod in the head, which is the tongue, but the Yesod in the body, of course, which is the male organ. Therefore, he was tested with sexual temptations. Same idea. Okay. Now, therefore, this is what happens to Yosef, which we begin to understand it's very different based on the ideas of Lashon Harah. Now, take a look at Egypt. The reason why the Jews were in Egypt, we know, is because they spoke Lashon Harah. Like Moshe Rabbeinu says, surely the matter is known. When he saw one Jew hitting another Jew, right? He said, Russia, why are you hitting your fellow Jew? So that Russia said, who made you the boss? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Mitzri? So Moshe Rabbeinu says, surely the matter is known. And what the pshat of that is, of course, the pashup pshat is surely the matter that I killed the mitzvah is going to be known to Pharaoh, Parai, because this Jew is going to inform me, which is exactly what happened. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Mashiach ben Yosef, ran for 54 years. He had to leave Egypt, right? Why? Because of Lashon Harah, because it splits the Yisod from the Malchus. So Yosef had to flee in Golus as a result of the Lashon Harah of Jews. Again, you see the incredible connection between the Goyal and Lashon Harah, because it splits the Yisod from the Malchus. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ochinu Dadover, Rashi says, the pshat really is, not that Moshe was afraid that he's going to inform, but now I know why the Jews are in such a long and bitter exile. You know, he knew that the Jews were in exile, but he said to himself, why? Why are they in such a bitter exile more than the other nations? Now that I see that they speak Lashon Harah, I know why, because they speak Lashon Harah, that causes the exile. Why? Because Yesod is split from Malchus. That's the idea of Ochei Noida Hadova, which of course is Lashon Harah. Now, therefore, in the end, it says that 12 months before the Geula, the redemption, all the Jews stopped speaking Lashon Harah. That's what the Medrash says. It says several times. The Rechaim HaKodesh brings it down, Parashat Mitzvah, and so on. What does that mean? Remember Moshe Rabbeinu, he approached the Rebbeinu Shalom in the snare by the burning bush, and the Rebbeinu Shalom says to him, go take my people out. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? You can't take these people out. Why? Because, and the Klei Yoka says this on that posuk, Yehin lo ya'aminu li. The reason why they are in Golus is because of Lashon Harah, because Lashon Harah splits the Yisod in the Malchus. How can you take them out? Or how can you ask me to take them out? So Rebbeinu Shalom says, no, they do not speak to Lashon Harah anymore. And of course, the Rebbeinu Shalom is referring to the 12 months before the Geula. They stopped speaking Lashon Harah. And that's why he told Moshe Rabbeinu to put his hands in his coat, come out, it's filled with leprosy, tzaras, put it in, comes out, it's tahor. Why? To show them that tzaras, which comes from speaking Lashon Harah, he doesn't have it anymore because it's cured, because the Jews do not speak Lashon Harah. Therefore, because the Jews stopped speaking Lashon Harah, that is what was mechaber, besides Yisurin, but that was what connected Yisud back to Malchus, because of Shmiras Halashon. Therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom said, Pokoid Pokadati. And the Rebbeinu Shalom was able to say, Vayeda Elokim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom knew, which of course is the Pekida, that is the Kabbalistic expression of Yisud recombining with Malchus. Therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom was able to tell him, and Moshe Rabbeinu came back to Klal Yisrael and said to the Jews that the Rebbeinu Shalom remembers you, Pokoid, that he remembers you, and of course the Yidden were able to get out. Now the Jews of course had succeeded. Oh, and by the way, one more idea. Why is it my Moshe Rabbeinu? Interesting idea, once you understand this. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu, after the snare, was on his way to Egypt. And all of a sudden the Malach wanted to kill him because he was neglectful in performing the mitzvah of Milah on his son. Remember that incident? Why does the Torah single out that incident, other than the fact that it almost killed Moshe Rabbeinu? But other than that, as an aside, why is that such an important event? Because if the essence of Geula, Yisod, is reconnected to Malchus, what's the essential mitzvah which reflects that? What's the essential mitzvah which shows that Yisod is back to Malchus? Milah. Because it takes away the foreskin and reveals Yisod to Malchus. So because the state of the Jews is where Yisod was connected to Malchus, it was very important for Moshe Rabbeinu to fulfill that mitzvah, which would be a reflection of the Spheeris in that new state. Therefore, since he was negligent, he himself possibly was bringing defects back into the reconnection, which of course resulted in a tremendous possible einish to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why at that time in the Torah you find all of a sudden Moshe Rabbeinu almost got killed. Why? Because the mitzvah that he was supposed to do was a reflection of the state of the Spheeris at the time he was going to take him out, which of course is that Yisod was connected to Malchus. And Milah would have indicated that. But the fact that he didn't do it, of course, was a very strong possible pagam, and therefore, of course, that's why the Torah relates it so strongly. In any case, the Jews got out, and the Zoma was lifted, which we know, by Matan Sinai. Now, when the Jews sinned at Har Sinai, they restored the Zoma, correct? What they did, see now, at Har Sinai, after the Jews got out of Egypt and so on, they removed the Zoma, tremendous amount of the Zoma. In fact, they removed it all, without going into the whole parsha of Zoma and so on, how much they removed. But they removed everything, and it was right before the Zechira. There was no Giloy yet. There could have been a Giloy, because that was Moshe Rabbeinu was coming down to bring the whole thing. That would have been the enormous Giloy completely. And that would have been the Zechira. However, the Jews sinned at the Egel, so they restored the Zoyama into the Bria, and unfortunately, everything was returned. However, what the Jews at the Egel did is they did the same thing Odom did by the Chet, Odom and Chava. They gave Mokum. They gave again an equal place of the Satan in the Bria. Just like Odom and Chava gave an equal place of the Satan in the Bria by their sin, and Cain is one that gave him dominion. The rest, or rather the sin of the golden calf of the Chet or Egel is what restored the Mokum, the place or the equality that the Satan had with man, back into the physical body. Because before Har Sinai it was removed, as the Gemara says, that the Zoyama was nifsa. However, in that in itself wouldn't have been as bad, because had the Jews not done the second sin, then they could have, Moshe still could have been Mashiach ben Yosef, who he really was, and the Gula could have taken place. What really killed it for Klal Yisrael was the Meraglim. That's why the Meraglim was so devastating. Those two Chatoim are the greatest Chatoim of Klal Yisrael. What the Meraglim did is, because of what they did, they reconnect, or they split Yesod from the Malchus totally. And that gave dominion of the Satan over the Bria. What was the major chet of the Meraglim? Lashon Harah. That's why. Because the Meraglim spoke Lashon Harah, all Klal Yisrael believed it. Therefore, that split Yesod and Malchus to such an extent where the Satan went on to stage 2, which was incredible dominion. And that's what forever lost, not forever, but that's what lost them the chance of Moshe to be Mashiach ben Yosef. That's when it was decreed that everybody died, and that time was over. Because of the chet of the Meraglim, which of course was Lashon Harah. This is the idea in the case of the Meraglim. So Moshe Rabbeinu could have been Mashiach, was not Mashiach because of what happened as a result of what the Meraglim did, which is Lashon Harah, and they restored the dominion to the Satan. And therefore, it was nigzat that they cannot restore, or they cannot massacre the Bria now. It has to go on for later. And that's why on the day that the Meraglim came back, which was Tisha B'Av, correct? 9th day of Av, right? On that day is a day of Puronia, is suffering to Klal Yisrael. Because what happened on Tisha B'Av? The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, right? By the Romans, and the first one by the Babylonians, right? What does that indicate? That's the dominion of the Satan over Klal Yisrael, you see. Because their chet was Lashon Harah, they split Yesod from Malchus tremendously. Therefore, it re-established not only the place of the Satan in the Bria, but the dominion of the Satan, and that was reflected in the day of Tisha B'Av, which is a day of the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, both of them, which is a complete reflection of the dominion of the Satan over Klal Yisrael, which of course exactly what happened by the Romans. That is mamish the Shlita, where Rome destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, of course, to begin the true Golus, which is the reflection of the dominion of the Satan over Klal Yisrael. And the last event which I will mention is, when again do we find that Yosef and Yehuda were split? By Rechavim and Yerovim. Again, Rechavim was Malchus, David, and Yerovim is Ephraim, was split. Why? Because the Gemara says that David HaMelech accepted or believed Lashon Harah on Mephibosheth. And at that time, when he believed Lashon Harah on Mephibosheth, the Gemara says that the Gzera came out and said that your kingdom will be split. Yerovim will be split from Rechavim. Why? Because when David was Makabel Lashon Harah, what happened? He split Yesod from Malchus, which automatically meant that Rechavim and Yerovim also had to be split, because that's literally Yehuda and Yosef, or Yisrael, being split. And it's interesting that Yosef, who is Yesod, he spoke Lashon Harah. And David, who is Malchus, which is receiving end, he believed Lashon Harah. It's interesting how each one worked it his own way. But in any case, that's why the Gzera was, after he believed Lashon Harah Mephibosheth, that's why Yehuda and Yosef, which are really at that time Rechavim and Yerovim, or Yehuda and of course Klal Yisrael and Yehuda, that is why they were split. Same idea. What have we seen so far? The enormous devastating consequences of Lashon Harah. However, it's taking us down a completely different road. Until now we saw that the pnimius of Lashon Harah, which is real pnimius, is that because you speak Lashon Harah, you invoke the kitrug, the prosecution against you, mida keneged mida. Since you spoke Lashon Harah, the Satan can speak Lashon Harah about you, which is a kitrug, it's a prosecution. This is what we saw, and that invokes a din. And then if you are, of course, found guilty, then he can be yonik from your kedusha, whatever it is. He can be yonik. That is its pnimius, and that pnimius answered an enormous amount of questions, which I had mentioned, of course, in the Lashon Harah tapes. However, In this tape, we see a different pneumius from a completely different framework. We see the pneumius of Lashon Harah from the Ruchnistige framework, and we see why it's so devastating. That Lashon Harah is able to be pogum, the Yesod from the Malchus, because the tongue is reflected, or is the human analog, an anatomical analog of Yesod. What does it do? It splits Yesod from Malchus. It allows the Satan to be unique from Yesod. He's able to give Zuma into the Bria and cause incredible amount of havoc. And of course, he's able to even have dominion over Adam. And the way to release this is to reverse it, masakin it, which of course the mitzvah Mila we see is the exact mitzvah, which is the exact analog of what has to be done, is to reconnect Yesod and Malchus. That is called the Pekida. And of course the Zechira is, after it's released, of course everything is then revealed. So the analog, of course, is to masakin and to bring back Yesod in Malchus, and the way that's done is, of course, don't speak Lashon Harah. So that's masakin the peh, as a result of that, and that is the way that Yesod can be nischaber to Malchus. Therefore, what we've seen by looking at some of the history in the Chumash, literally how it goes on as a result of Yesod Malchus, we've seen therefore how events can actually be described this way. And we've seen, of course, that if you bring back Yesod Malchus, which is the Pekida, then that's the beginning of the Geula. And we understand why, of course, Lashon Harah is so, Shmiras Halashon rather, not speaking Lashon Harah, is so pivotal to the Geula of Klal Yisrael. It is not merely a luxury item. It's necessary to reconnect Yesod Malchus in the Elomus Elyonis, in the higher worlds, and then the Geula happens here, the Pekida, which is the release of all the neshamas and the Yechidah of the Mashiach, because evil, of course, has no more dominion, because Yesod Malchus is connected, and he loses his ability, of course, to control the Bria. This is what we see. So therefore, Shmiras Halashon is very important, and that's why I say, if you recall, it's not on this tape, it's on another tape, 20th century tapes, but that in 1871, the Chofetz Chaim wrote the Sefer Chofetz Chaim, which are the laws of course, Lashon Harah, in the exact same year that Germany united for the first time in history. Because you need Shmiras Halashon once Germany is going to unite. And we know Germany is bad news for the Jews, without going into who Germany is, which I talked about in another tape. That's why the Chofetz Chaim, the Roshim, sends down a shefa, a Spheeris, an awakening, an arousal on the Chofetz Chaim to write Shmiras Halashon when he's going to bring the Geula imminently. And therefore, and we know, of course, that the Chofetz Chaim began to write the Hagdama to Shmiras Halashon in 1867, 4 years before 1871, 4 years before Bismarck united Germany, in order to begin this process. And as I had pointed out, in 1990, who knew that Germany would be united again? We see what's going on every day in the political events, where even Russia is capitulating, of course, to Germany. Germany and Russia are going to go hand in hand with the US, and of course that's the beginning of the end, as they begin to, of course, go against Klal Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, 4 years ago, 1986, Shmiras Halashon began, again because Shmiras Halashon must be intact before the true messianic process begins, because Yesod has to again reconnect to Malchus. And of course this begins in the same year of 1990, when of course the Geula, of course, is obviously beginning, Tov Shinun, which is of course 95,750. And also, which I have not mentioned, but just to mention, that is also the reason for the defects of the Mashiach because of Lashon Harah. Because as we know, Moshe Rabbeinu was what? He was a Kvad Peh and Kvad Lashon, the Torah says. Why? Because since the major defect in Klal Yisrael was that Yesod was split from Malchus, the Lashon and the Peh, therefore he was a Kvad Peh, Kvad Lashon, because the Mashiach mirrors the damage that Klal Yisrael has. In fact, he suffers in the sins of Klal Yisrael in order to help them atone. So he mirrors their chatoim. It says in Yeshaya and Gimel that he is a mirror image of the sins of Jews. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu had the pagam in the Lashon, of course, just the way Klal Yisrael had altogether. And that also indicates other ideas what the Yisurin of Mashiach is, because it also the Yisurin is mirrored after the Inyan of Lashon Harah, because he suffers also in whatever the damages are as a result of Lashon Harah. This is the premise of Lashon Harah from a completely different standpoint. All this goes to illustrate how important it is not to speak Lashon Harah. And by not speaking Lashon Harah, that's why it says that if somebody does not speak Lashon Harah, he's Mekarev the Gula, right? He actually brings the redemption closer. Why? Now you understand it from a different level altogether, because he reconnects Yesod and Malchus, and when that's reconnected, of course, there's a tikkun to Malchus, because Malchus now can receive its proper shefa, its proper nourishment, so to speak, its proper force, which it receives from Yesod. It's able to receive that, and as a result of that, result of the tikkun of Malchus, the Rebbe Shem is able to, of course, reveal himself. As it says in Aleinu, l'sakin olam, the Malchus